Richard Kenneth Djerf was born on November 6, 1969, in Phoenix, Arizona. He would go on to commit one of the most brutal family massacres in Arizona's history, a crime driven by a grievance that spiraled into vengeance. In January of 1993, his former roommate Albert Luna Jr. allegedly broke into Djerf's apartment and stole electronic equipment and an AK-47. Djerf reported the theft to the police, but when law enforcement failed to deliver what he believed was justice, he decided to take matters into his own hands. On the afternoon of September 14, 1993, Djerf walked up to the home of the Luna family in Phoenix carrying artificial flowers as a ruse. He forced his way in at gunpoint, armed with a 9mm Beretta, a knife, and gloves. Inside were Albert Luna Sr., Patricia Luna, their 18-year-old daughter Rochelle, and their 5-year-old son Damien. Djerf took the mother and young son into the kitchen, bound their arms and legs, gagged them, and repeatedly asked Patricia which one should die first or where her son was. The daughter, Rochelle, arrived home around 3 p.m., and Djerf forced her to her bedroom where he violated her repeatedly before murdering her. He then confronted the father, Albert Sr., smashing his head with an aluminum baseball bat, and then him 6 times when the father lunged with a pocket knife. He shot Patricia and Damien in the head at close range, doused gasoline around the house and on the bodies, attempted to ignite the scene, and then drove away in the Luna family's car. The next night, the victim, Luna Jr., returned home to find the charred scene of unimaginable horror. Djerf boasted to his girlfriend and friends about the murders, describing them as really awesome and revealing key details which led to his arrest on September 18, 1993. In August 1995, he pled guilty to 4 counts of first-degree murder, the 3 other victims of the family, and in May 1996, he was sentenced to death. Over the next 3 decades, Djerf fought his appeals, with significant legal questions surrounding his decision to represent himself and waive counsel, and challenges about the legitimacy of the waiver. On August 19, 2025, the Arizona Supreme Court issued a warrant fixing his execution for Friday, October 17, 2025. On that morning, Djerf was executed by lethal injection at the Arizona State Prison Complex, Florence at 10:40 a.m. after more than 29 years on death row. Norman Merrill Grimm, Jr. It was the summer of 1998 in East Milton, Florida, a quiet community near Pensacola Bay, the kind of place where neighbors waved, lawns were trimmed, and nobody locked their doors at night. But on one humid July morning, a horrific crime would shatter that peace and set into motion a case that would linger for more than 2 decades. Her name was Cynthia Campbell, 37 years old, a respected attorney known for her kindness and work ethic. But when Cynthia didn't show up for work one day, her colleagues knew something was wrong. She never missed a day, never without a call. Hours later, her body was discovered floating near the Pensacola Bay Bridge, wrapped in a bedsheet and garbage bags, weighted down in a desperate attempt to hide the evidence. The autopsy told a story too brutal to imagine. Cynthia had been beaten in the face with a hammer, her skull fractured and stabbed 11 times, 7 of those wounds piercing her heart. But the medical examiner concluded she had also been sexually assaulted before her death. Investigators soon learned that the man responsible wasn't a stranger lurking in the shadows. He was her next-door neighbor, Norman Merrill Grimm, Jr. Grimm was 38 at the time, a man with a long criminal past. He had been previously convicted of violent felonies in the 1980s and was on parole when Cynthia was murdered. On the morning of the crime, a strange event occurred. A lug nut had been thrown through Cynthia's window, and she called the police. Norman Grimm appeared at the scene, pretending to offer help. What police didn't know was that only hours later, Cynthia Campbell would be dead, and the same man who stood beside them that morning was the one who took her life. As detectives combed through the scene, they noticed evidence that would ultimately tie Grimm to the murder. DNA samples, fibers, and traces from the carpet in his home matched the materials found on Campbell's body. When questioned, Grimm denied everything, but the forensic evidence was overwhelming. He was arrested and later charged with first-degree murder and sexual battery. In December 2000, after a 2-week trial, a Florida jury unanimously found Norman Grimm guilty on all counts. During the sentencing phase, Grimm made an extraordinary decision. He refused to allow his attorneys to present any mitigating evidence. No pleas for mercy, no childhood trauma, no mental health defense. He simply accepted his fate. The jury's recommendation was unanimous: death. For years, Grimm sat on Florida's death row at the state prison in Stark, waiting as his appeals wound their way through the courts. But even in the end, he remained defiant, choosing to waive his final appeals, a move that would seal his own execution date. On October 28, 2025, 27 years after the murder of Cynthia Campbell, Norman Merrill Grimm Jr. was led into the execution chamber. He offered no final statement, only 2 words when asked if he had anything to say. "No, sir." At 6:02 p.m., the lethal injection was administered. By 6:14, he was pronounced dead, Florida's 15th execution this year, setting a new state record. Anthony Todd Boyd. In the heart of Talladega County, Alabama, where the summer air hangs thick and heavy, a crime unfolded that would haunt the state for more than 3 decades. It was July of 1993 when Gregory Hughley, a man known on the streets as New York, suddenly vanished. He was a small-time drug dealer with a reputation for being slick, but behind his confidence was a $200 debt, money he owed on a cocaine deal that had gone bad. Within days, his disappearance turned from rumor to horror when police discovered his charred remains in a remote field outside Anniston. Investigators concluded that Hughley had been doused with gasoline and set on fire while still alive. Prosecutors quickly built a theory that the murder was an act of punishment, a message to anyone who might cross the local drug network. Their attention turned to a 26-year-old man named Anthony Todd Boyd, a Talladega native with a troubled background but no record of murder. Authorities claimed Boyd was the ringleader behind the attack, that he and 4 others had kidnapped Hughley, driven him to the field, and set him ablaze. The story was sensational, and the community wanted closure. But from the beginning, the case against Boyd was paper thin. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, no physical evidence tying him to the scene. No eyewitness ever claimed to see Boyd there. The entire prosecution rested on the testimony of a single co-defendant, a man who had cut a deal with the state to save himself from the death penalty. In exchange for his life, he gave the prosecutors what they wanted: a name. In 1995, Anthony Boyd went on trial for capital murder. The outcome seemed preordained. His lawyer, court-appointed and underfunded, had little experience handling a case of that magnitude. There was almost no investigation into Boyd's alibi. In a county known for swift justice and harsh sentences, the jury took less than 2 hours to decide his fate. Anthony Todd Boyd was convicted and sentenced to death. From the moment the verdict was read, Boyd maintained his innocence. He insisted he hadn't been there, hadn't touched Hughley, and hadn't killed anyone. Over the years, he filed appeal after appeal, arguing that the case against him was built on lies and bad lawyering. But the courts saw it differently. Each motion was denied, each new hearing closed with the same result: execution upheld. And so, for more than 30 years, Anthony Todd Boyd waited on death row in Alabama's Holman Correctional Facility. In 2025, the governor signed a warrant for Boyd's execution, choosing a method both new and deeply controversial: nitrogen hypoxia, a procedure in which the condemned is deprived of oxygen and forced to breathe pure nitrogen until the body shuts down. Officials called it humane. Witnesses called it chilling. On the evening of October 23, 2025, at the Holman Correctional Facility, Anthony Todd Boyd was led into the brightly lit execution chamber. He walked calmly, his face stoic. When asked if he had any final words, his answer was simple: "I didn't kill that man." God knows the truth. A black mask was placed over his face, and a low hiss filled the room as nitrogen replaced oxygen. For several minutes, Boyd gasped, trembled, then went still. At 6:39 p.m., he was pronounced dead. He was 58 years old. In the town of Dale, Indiana, a community of barely 1,500 inhabitants, the summer of 2001 promised a typical high school break for 15-year-old Stacy Payne, honor student, cheerleader, band member, someone the town believed in and cared for. But on July 11th of that year, that normalcy was shattered. In the living room of her family's home, a man knocked at her door claiming to be looking for a lost dog, and the predator behind that polite facade was Roy Lee Ward. He gained entry, marched past the threshold, and unleashed a horrific attack. He assaulted Stacy and committed other unspeakable acts before taking her life. Responding officers found him still in the doorway with a knife in hand. Stacy was airlifted to a hospital hours later, but it was too late. She would not survive her injuries. Ward was arrested at the scene, swiftly charged with first-degree murder and criminal deviant conduct. His trial would begin in October 2002 in Spencer County, Indiana. A jury found him guilty of murder and related charges, and in December the same year the jury recommended the death penalty. But the path to execution was not direct. The Indiana Supreme Court reversed Ward's conviction in 2004, citing pre-trial publicity and concerns about the fairness of the venue. The case was remanded for retrial. In 2007, Ward entered a guilty plea, was sentenced to death, and the appeals began. State and federal courts alike would consider his case for years. Throughout the decades that followed, Ward's legal team raised issues about Indiana's lethal injection protocol, transparency around drugs used, and questions about his mental health. Reports emerged later that he had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, which his attorneys argued affected his ability to communicate remorse in a way jurors recognized. Yet for Stacy's family, the passage of time brought no solace. Her mother testified that, "Now our family gatherings are no longer whole. Birthdays are sad reminders of what we lost. In mid-2025, the Indiana Supreme Court denied Ward's final appeals, the parole board recommended against clemency, and Governor Mike Braun rejected his plea." On October 10, 2025, in the early hours of dawn, Ward was executed by lethal injection at the Indiana State Prison in Michigan City. He was 53 years old when pronounced dead at 12:33 a.m. In Tippah County, Mississippi, on the winter afternoon of January 29, 1993, 20-year-old community college student Christy Denise Ray returned home with her mother after work, unaware that within hours the calm of that small town would be forever shattered. Christy had just finished a shift at the bank where her mother also worked. She planned to spend the evening with family and friends. But when her mother came back to their home and found Christy's car missing and a handwritten ransom note left on the table, alarm rippled through the household. Investigators soon discovered forcible entry had occurred, and what followed was one of the most agonizing investigations in northern Mississippi. The perpetrator, Charles Ray Crawford, a 26-year-old who was already out on bail and facing a pending trial on charges of sexual misconduct and assault of a 17-year-old girl. 4 days before his own trial, Crawford allegedly broke into the Ray home, abducted Christy, took her to an abandoned barn, handcuffed her to a small cedar sapling, stuffed a sock in her mouth, assaulted her, and then unalived her. He then buried her body in leaves nearby. When questioned, he claimed blackout episodes and that he awoke and knew immediately Christy was dead. In April 1994, after a trial in Lafayette County, a jury found Crawford guilty of capital murder, burglary of an inhabited dwelling, and rape. The jury recommended death. The judge accepted. The years that followed were filled with appeals, petitions, and legal argumentation. Crawford maintained he could not remember due to blackouts, seizures, and mental health issues. His defense raised claims of psychogenic amnesia and bipolar disorder, while prosecutors pointed to the premeditation, the prior violent convictions, end of wind, and the chilling nature of the murder. In September 2025, the Mississippi Supreme Court set an execution date of October 15th for Crawford, affirming that he had exhausted all state and federal remedies. On the evening of October 15th, 2025, at the Mississippi State Penitentiary in Parchman, Mississippi, Crawford was executed by lethal injection at 6:15 p.m. He was 59 years old and had spent more than 30 years on death row. In his final statement, he addressed both his family and the victim's family. "To my family, I love you. I'm at peace. I've got God's peace. To the victim's family, true closure and true peace. You cannot reach that without God." The legacy of the case is layered. On one hand, Christy Ray's life ended in a manner so violent and shocking that few could comprehend it. On the other hand, Crawford's execution raised questions of fairness. His trial counsel conceded his guilt over his repeated objections, an issue later raised under the Sixth Amendment right against counsel conceding guilt. In the spring of 1996, a seemingly ordinary man walked among the quiet neighborhoods of Plant City and Tampa, Florida. Church-going, working as a landscaper on a 27-acre property laced with ponds, and known to the community as a deacon at his Baptist church. His name was Samuel Lee Smithers, and behind that calm facade lay a darkness that would shock the region. On May 12, 1996, Smithers picked up Denise Elaine Roach, a 24-year-old sex worker from Jamaica, at a Tampa motel under the pretense of paying for sexual services. He transported her to the rural Plant City property where he worked, and there assaulted and discarded her body into one of the property's ponds. 16 days later, on May 28, 1996, he met Christy Cowan in similar circumstances, again at a motel in Tampa, and drove her to the same property. That same day, the property owner arrived unexpectedly and discovered Smithers cleaning an axe in the carport and a pool of blood nearby. The owner reported the incident, and law enforcement soon discovered drag marks leading into a pond on the property. There, they recovered the bodies of Cowan and Roach, both victims of violent deaths, beaten, strangled, some wounds inflicted with sharp tools and heavy manual force. Smithers' own story shifted under interrogation. He initially claimed the Roach killing was accidental and later alleged someone else had attacked the women as part of a blackmail-oriented scheme. But the forensic evidence, the confessions, and the pattern of his conduct told a different story. At his 1999 trial in Hillsborough County, Florida, a jury found him guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder and recommended the death penalty. Smithers was sentenced to die, a sentence affirmed by the Florida Supreme Court. In subsequent years, he challenged his conviction and sentence on various grounds, including the argument that his advanced age, 72 at the time of execution, made his execution a violation of the Eighth Amendment. The court rejected that claim, holding there is no categorical exemption based on age alone. Finally, on October 14, 2025, Smithers was executed by lethal injection at the Florida State Prison near Stark. He was pronounced dead at approximately 6:15 p.m., and when asked for final words, he replied simply, "No, sir." His execution marked the 14th in Florida in 2025, setting a new state record for annual executions. Juan Raúl Garza was born on November 18, 1956, in Brownsville, Texas, the son of Mexican migrant farm workers. He grew up working alongside his parents and selling fruit door to door, eventually dropping out of high school to help support his family. But in the late 1980s and early 1990s, the quiet life of a working man turned into something far darker. Garza became the ringleader of a large marijuana smuggling organization that moved thousands of kilograms of cannabis from Mexico into the United States, with operations stretching across Texas, Louisiana, and Michigan. As his empire grew, so did the methods of enforcement and control. Prosecutors later linked Garza to at least 8 murders, 3 of which he was convicted of ordering as part of the enterprise, targeted killings of men he believed had crossed him, informed on his operation, or failed to deliver. In 1993, a federal jury sitting in the Southern District of Texas found Garza guilty of engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise, money laundering, large-scale marijuana distribution, and 3 counts of murder in furtherance of that enterprise. The punishment phase followed. Based on the jury's recommendation, the court sentenced him to death under the Federal Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1988, making Garza the first drug trafficking kingpin to receive a federal death sentence under that statute. For years, Garza awaited execution on federal death row. His case attracted attention not only for its brutality, but because of what it symbolized. He was a Hispanic defendant, sentenced to death for actions committed in Texas, one of many federal death penalty cases concentrated in certain regions. Critics raised concerns of racial and geographic disparity in the imposition of the federal death penalty. Ultimately, Garza's execution date was set for June 19, 2001. At the United States Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana, the same chamber used for Timothy McVeigh's execution just 8 days earlier, Juan Raúl Garza was executed by lethal injection. His final words were brief but remorseful. "I just want to say that I'm sorry, and I apologize for all the pain and grief that I have caused. I just want to say that I'm sorry, and I apologize for all the pain and grief that I have caused. I ask your forgiveness, and God bless you all. Thank you." In the spring of 1990, in Mulberry, Florida, a bitter divorce was underway between Marie Nolles and her husband David Pittman. Marie had filed for separation, tensions flared, and threats were reportedly exchanged. On the night of May 15th, a crime would unfold so brutal it would forever scar a quiet Florida community. Pittman, investigators say, cut the phone line at the Nolles family home. Her parents, Clarence and Barbara, in their 50s, and Bonnie, their 21-year-old daughter, lived there. That same night, the bodies of Clarence, Barbara, and Bonnie Nolles were discovered inside that home. Each had been fatally stabbed. The house was then set ablaze and Bonnie's car stolen and later torched by fire. Witnesses testified that Pittman was seen fleeing the burning vehicle, and a jailhouse informant later claimed Pittman admitted to the killings. Within a year, he was indicted for 3 counts of first-degree murder, along with arson and grand theft. The trial commenced in 1991, and a jury found Pittman guilty. In the penalty phase, the jury recommended death by a 9-3 vote. He was sentenced to die. The court found aggravating circumstances in his prior violent felony and the heinous, atrocious, or cruel nature of the murders. Over the ensuing decades, Pittman would challenge his conviction and sentence time and again, arguing he suffered from intellectual disabilities, citing IQ scores in the low 70s, brain damage, and a childhood marked by abuse. But his appeals were denied. On September 17, 2025, at the age of 63, Pittman was executed by lethal injection at the Florida Department of Corrections facility near Stark. His final words, "I know you all came to watch an innocent man be murdered by the state of Florida. I am innocent. I didn't kill anybody. That's it." Blaine Keith Milam was born on December 12, 1989, in Gregg County, Texas. He dropped out of school in the 4th grade and by his late teens had a criminal record, including being a registered sex offender for prior assaults on children. His life would pivot on a horrific crime committed in Rusk County, Texas on December 2, 2008, when he was 18 years old. On that morning, Milam and his fiancée, Jessica Carson, called 911 to report that their 13-month-old daughter, Amora Carson, was dead. What police found when they arrived would horrify investigators. The toddler's body bore multiple injuries: broken ribs, strangulation signs, extensive bite marks, and evidence of sexual mutilation. Medical examiners would later call it the worst case of brutality I've ever seen. As the investigation unfolded, Milam and Carson offered shifting and conflicting accounts. At first, they claimed the child had been left sleeping alone, then returned to find her dead. Later, they claimed the toddler was possessed by demons and that they had attempted an exorcism on her. Investigators discovered strong forensic evidence tying Milam to the bite marks and the body, including DNA swabs from the injuries that were consistent with his profile. Despite Milam's attempts to shift blame to Carson, the prosecution built a case that he physically inflicted the injuries while Carson watched, failed to intervene, and colluded in the deception. In May 2010, after a trial moved from Rusk County due to pretrial publicity, a jury found Milam guilty of capital murder. The sentencing phase resulted in a death penalty. He was sentenced to die. Carson was later convicted and received life in prison without parole. In the years that followed, Milam's team raised significant issues. He argued he was intellectually disabled based on a history of extremely low educational achievement, limited cognition, and below-average IQ. They also challenged the reliability of forensic bite mark analysis, questioning whether the matching of his teeth to the bite wounds met scientific standards. Milam's execution was initially scheduled for January 21, 2021, but was stayed. Eventually, on September 25, 2025, he was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit in Texas. According to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, his last statement thanked supporters, referenced his Christian faith, and did not express remorse for the crime itself. In late March of 1997, a crime unfolded that would echo for decades in Etowah County, Alabama. At the heart of it was a man named Geoffrey Todd West, a former employee of Harold's Chevron in Atala, a convenience store where he once clocked in and stocked shelves. On the night of March 27th into the early hours of March 28th, West and his girlfriend drove to that very store. West had, according to court records, previously expressed intentions to rob the place and leave no witnesses. He entered the store armed with a .45 caliber handgun, approached the attendant behind the counter, and forcibly took approximately $250 from a cookie can where the store's money was kept. In the course of that robbery, the attendant, 33-year-old Margaret Parrish Berry, was shot in the back of the head while lying prone on the floor behind the counter. The medical examiner concluded the wound would cause rapid incapacitation and a very rapid death. West was apprehended and charged with capital murder. The killing during the course of a robbery qualifies under Alabama's statute as capital. At his trial, the evidence included the store layout, the amount stolen, West's prior employment at the location, his prior statements of intention, and the deliberate nature of the killing. In June 1999, the jury found him guilty of capital murder and by a 10-2 vote recommended the death penalty. The trial court accepted the recommendation and sentenced West to death. Over the next 26 years, West remained on Alabama's death row. The case continued to draw attention, not only because of the murder itself, but because of the execution method that was eventually chosen. In 2024, Alabama became the first U.S. state to carry out an execution using nitrogen hypoxia, a method where the condemned inhales nearly pure nitrogen, depriving the brain of oxygen. West, like several other inmates, selected nitrogen hypoxia as his method. In July 2025, Governor Kay Ivey set West's execution date for September 25, 2025. Weeks before the execution, West spoke publicly, stating that though he did not deny what he had done, he struggled to understand the younger version of himself who committed the act. He said, "There's not a day that goes by that I don't regret it and wish that I could take that back." Meanwhile, Will Berry, the son of the slain attendant, who was only 11 at the time of his mother's death, stepped into an unusual role. He publicly pleaded for clemency. He told Alabama's governor that taking West's life would not bring his mother back, and urged forgiveness over vengeance. On the evening of the execution, West was strapped to the gurney at the William C. Holman Correctional Facility. He wore a gas mask wired for nitrogen hypoxia. According to reports from watchers and official statements, during the first minutes his eyes were open, his head rocked side to side, he appeared to struggle for breath and exhibited signs of turmoil. He offered no final statement except "no sir" when asked if he had any words. At about 6:22 p.m., the state announced he was pronounced dead.